I was working as a chiropractor and I just knew there was something missing. You know, people have got pain and stress and I'm taking away their pain and stress, and then some of it's staying away, some of it's coming back. And I was like, this pattern is not going to be enough. Like, I need to understand what's going on in the body. And for me, my next journey was going to be in an ashram in India. So I arrived in India in an ashram. You know, I was there for learning. I had questions that I needed answering, and I'd already decided I probably can't be a chiropractor anymore. Like, I didn't want to help with a little bit of pain or a little bit of tension. I wanted to change lives. And so coming to the ashram very quickly, I started working on people. You know, they found out that I was a chiropractor and I was working with a more of a tonal model, working with the nervous system. It was the start of the spinal flow technique. And I would make the most gentle contact and they would start to cry. Or some of them were experiencing past trauma that was coming out. And for me, I was like, what is going on? I've got the most gentle contact I'm making on their spine, but it's like their body is releasing what had been stored. You know, layers of stress had been stored, or things that they'd forgotten about from when they were, you know, a little girl or a little boy were starting to come to the surface. And I had no idea what was going on. I was, you know, just freshly out of school. You know, I was still a very science-based chiropractor. I had been working at the Texas Back Institute with the orthopedic surgeons and neurologists. So for me to see this result so quickly with just a gentle contact on their spine that was bringing out tears, it made me really try to understand what's going on in the body. I knew a lot about physical stress, and I knew a lot about injuries, and I knew a lot about athletes, and I knew a lot about, you know, if there's physical stress in the body, it stores at a blockage. You know, as a chiropractor, we spoke about subluxations and, you know, a bit of like sprain and strain. And if I can help get that, we're going to, you know, help them with that physical stress. But what I didn't know enough about or much about at all was the emotional stress. And in the ashram, that's what was happening. It was like, you know, with these contacts, it was the deepest layer of stress that was stored in their body, that their body had hidden away, was starting to come to the surface. And for me, this was amazing. And I was also really young. I was like, what's going on? Like, what's happening with this? And I wanted to understand more. And I was really looking at patterns. Like, I was looking at patterns with posture. You know, a lot of these people were hidden, like they were, call it a kyphosis, but it's like a little bit of a sort of hunch over, you know, with lots of stress in their shoulders. And as soon as I make a contact, it was like there was a stress that was released from that area, which was the area of the heart. And I was like, wow, isn't this interesting? You know, people that have a similar posture, it's kind of like they're hiding their heart. I call it the empath's posture. And then when I make a contact to try and move them towards greater healing, tears are coming out. I was like, you know what, there's a pattern in this. I'm seeing that. I also started to see that people that have had bigger stress, it might have been, you know, rape or abuse or huge amount of stress, they were starting to develop that sideways curve, you know, what I call a scoliosis. Forward is more of a kyphosis, on the side is a scoliosis. And I noticed making a contact with their spine that they were remembering some big trauma that had happened to their body that they'd locked away in that area. And I thought, isn't that interesting that the spine comes sideways? It's like it's actually creating a cage around the heart to protect it. And, you know, this is where, again, I fell more in love with the body and more in love with the nervous system, because I'm like, you know what, the spine tells a story. When you have a look at someone's body, you can actually have a look at them, and based on how they're holding, you can really get to understand what's happening in their life. And so in India, it was like a massive initiation for me. Like, all of a sudden I was working with people where their emotions were shifting. And when their emotions started to shift, I realized, you know what? That's the stress that's stored at the deepest level. You know, I'd been working in the past with what was on the surface, like working with the layers on the surface that was causing, you know, their symptoms. But then I realized it was such a deeper level. And that's when we worked with the emotions of where are the deep emotions. And I realized that they get stored at a deeper level. And what that does is it locks the nervous system, the spine, the nervous system, into fight or flight, but it also holds it into a position. And that was a massive learning for me. And that was also at the same time where I certainly didn't discover, but I came across the teaching of the 7 chakras. And, the 7 chakras have been around forever. For me, when I started to read about the chakras, I'm like, oh, wow, this is really so similar to what I see in the spine. And, there's 7 chakras, and they've become the framework of what I teach with the 7 gateways of the spine, because I realized that there was a map that was already out there, and it's been around there out forever. But the 7 chakras made me understand the spine and my clients at a whole nother level. And, it just showed me, like when I work with someone's spine and I was looking at, the center gateway, the thoracic spine, and like, you know what? There are curves that change. And when they release that emotion that's been stored, the curves start to change back. Like, what is that? And the chakra system, helped me understand more about the heart and, this heart area. And, here I've got, the lower cervical spine, I call the passion gateway. It's C3 to C7. All the nerves come out here. They come and supply the thyroid. They come to the shoulder. They come around down to the arm as well. And the passion is about expression. And when I learned that in the chakra system too, I was like, oh, wow. We're saying the same thing, which really led me to believe that I believe there's nothing new in this world. Like, there's so many incredible people that have created systems to understand the body. But for me, at the ashram was when I really started to learn and understand the chakras and how that's what I'd been finding with the spine and the nervous system, which has led me to create the map of understanding the body through the 7 gateways of the spine. And so once I understood the 7 chakras and I created the 7 gateways as a map to understand the body, like, so many more things made sense to me, because at the time my clients and my patients were showing me their x-rays, their MRIs, their CTs, their blood work, and it wasn't mimicking how they feel and how they function. And what I learned very quickly is, someone can have an x-ray and it can have the most amount of degeneration and, it may not look really great, but their function is okay. And on the other side is someone that's really not doing well at all. Like, they're not able to move, they're not mobile, they've got barely any motion in their vertebra, they're hunched over, their posture's changed, and the x-ray looks perfect. An MRI shows tissue, blood tests will show, what's happening with the markers. But, where's a test that has a look at the spine and the nervous system, how you function? And that's where I've created the 7 gateways as a way to actually monitor and assess how the body is functioning and where stress may have been stored in one of the gateways. And for me, that's an accurate way of understanding and interpreting the body, which really correlates to how people are feeling. So for me, there's been so many times where people have said to me, I don't know what's going on. I feel so bad. I've got no energy. I'm not feeling great. And my tests are okay. And the doctors are sending me home and they're saying there's nothing wrong. And then they come and see me and I do a test. I do the 7 gateways test. I do the 7 gateways posture. And I can see that, rather than having full movement here, they've got 5% of movement. Their posture's completely changed. So for me, it completely makes sense that they're feeling the pain or the lack of energy that they're experiencing, because their spine, their nervous system, and the function of the 7 gateways, they're not functioning as well as they should be. So the puzzle makes sense to me. But if I relied on the tests that other people do, what would happen is I wouldn't have the answer that these people are looking for. They're wanting to know what's going on in their body. And now we've got a way to understand and to analyze the 7 gateways to completely interpret the function of the spine, the nervous system, and which in turn relates to every system of the body and the cells and the muscles and every organ in the body. And so when we start to use the 7 gateways as a framework of the body and we can start to assess our clients, we can really see what's going on. Peter that came to see me that had fibromyalgia, he had massive depression, he was suicidal, and he didn't want to be here anymore. When I found what was happening in his body, I found that there was not just one gateway that was blocked. The biggest thing that I found was right up here at the pause gateway, right at the top here, there was a huge blockage through here, which meant the messages from his brain were not coming through to the rest of his body. And when there's a blockage up here in the pause gateway, what happens then is it's like there's no energy in the body for healing. So I found that there was a massive blockage in the pause gateway, but not just that, looking at the center gateway through here, which is the heart area, as well as the power gateway, lumbar spine, digestion, and the pelvis as well, and into the base gateway. So it wasn't just one area that was blocked, there was so many different gateways that was blocked, and there wasn't any available energy in his system. And so what we started to do with Peter to turn this around to make changes, we started to work with what was working in the body. And that's what we do with the spinal flow technique, is we find what does work as opposed to focusing on what doesn't work, what's broken. We really focus on what does work. Where is the available energy in the system, so the body can start to find that and it can start to move towards greater healing. And so what happened was, as we started to work with that, there started to be more ease, and it was like there was a gentle flow of energy, I call it spinal flow, that started to come up through his spine. And what I could see is one gateway at a time, there was more ease, there was more flow. And rather than being rigid and stuck and the bones really hard and the muscles feeling really stuck, holding him together, there started to be more movement, more flow in the system. And it was like there was just a gentle wave of flow and ease coming up all the way the spine. And I remember when it started to move all the way and come up into the area of this area, the thoracic spine, the heart. And that's what, that's when the tears came up. And that's where he sat up and he was like, oh, wow, this is what it feels like to be me. I feel like me again, which I haven't felt like that for, 30, 40 years. And, that's the moment that for me, that I remember what we do and the power of, having this map, having a way to understand the body, to interpret it, but a system that we can start to move through healing, so the body learns how to heal, how to find its own stress that's stored in the body, but how it can move towards greater healing, which really starts to look at changing lives. And for me, that's what I learnt in the ashram. I went to the ashram and I'm massively grateful for my time there, because it showed me how to understand and interpret the body completely different. And for me, that's where I realized that every single person's body, every single person's life experience is different. But if we can have a map and a guide to understand, to interpret, and stop relying, tests are great. I've got no problems with tests, but if we can have a way to understand what the body is doing right now, a way to analyze the function of someone's spine, then that can move us all towards massive healing. And right now, there's such a need for healing in the body, in the mind, in the heart, and all of it together via the framework of the 7 gateways of the spine.